Welcome to A Moment of Bach, where we take our favorite moments from the composer's vast musical output, just a minute's worth, or even a few seconds, and show you why we think they are remarkable. We are your hosts, Alex and Christian Giebert. Today, we have a historic 4th episode of a mini-series on a Brandenburg Concerto. We've so far covered Brandenburg Concertos 3 through 6. Each of those have 3 movements. Brandenburg Concerto 1, which we're looking at now, it's a little bit special. It has 3 opening movements, I guess you could call it, followed by a grand minuet, which is interspersed with trios and a polonaise. So we hear this minuet 4 times. So today, we focus on the minuet itself. In this Brandenburg Concerto number 1, you can think of the instruments being in 3 different groups, and that is the strings, the reeds, and the horns. The string instruments, the violins and viola, as well as that piccolo violin, and then there is also a continuo contingent of lower strings with the harpsichord, and then the brass consists of just 2 horns, whereas the reeds consists of 3 oboes and a bassoon, all of which are written out. It's a lot of double reeds for a baroque orchestra. And what I find kind of charming is the description on the Netherlands Bach Society page for this concerto, which offers a theory of what these 3 groups are. So hunting is definitely a component of this because of the horn calls that we've heard all the way from the beginning. All of these will make their appearance in this minuet, which is a 7-section rondo, a 7-section rounded form. Each group gets their turn, but this delightful theory is that they each represent the different social classes of the time. So there's some sociology there. The royal court is represented by the elegant string section. It's softer and smaller in sound, but it sort of runs the show and gets all the fancy stuff. Maybe that one piccolo violin is the duke or king or something. The aristocrats are represented by the military horns or the hunting horns, the noble people, but not the royals. And then the reeds are just the common people because they're the town pipers. Perhaps maybe I might add that maybe they're shepherds. It's sort of an oboe stereotype, I guess, of old oboe parts being meant to represent pastoral scenes. And they each have their say here. And they have to also work together. So there's some interesting 18th century culture analogy in there somewhere. But the king or duke or whatever we're calling the band leader here who plays concertino violin, the small violin, piccolo violin, his job is kind of done by this point, unfortunately, because he had a lot to do in the previous movements, but here, this part, played by Bojan Cicic, a Croatian-born violinist and concertmaster here of this recording. At this point, his individual stuff is over and he's just with his group. And so to close this Brandenburg Concerto, we have a big dance where everybody's invited. Even the commoners with their honky bassoons and oboes. And even the military men with their hunting horns. Everybody can come to the final event here. And they all begin together with the minuet. We will return to the minuet 3 more times. As you said, Alex, it happens 4 times. Now, it happens differently each time. Some of that is per Bach's own instruction in the manuscript, and some of it is just choices that you can make that the Netherlands Bach Society has made. So a minuet is like a fancy dance, right? It's a ballroom dance.
Fancy dance.
So maybe that plays into the social strata metaphor there. Everybody is actually invited to this fancy dance. And interestingly, the aristocrats have the horn calls. Those are the different material because, the common folk and the royals actually get to play the same musical material, which is the fancier sounding material.
There is an uncommon equality to all the parts in here. The horn part throughout this whole concerto has had some melodic writing and stepwise things that are rarely seen for a natural horn of that time period. The oboes were clearly thought of as a featured part of the concerto as well because there's 3 oboes, which is pretty rare, and a written out bassoon part, which is not assumed in this time period to have. And so their part was important as well. So everyone's here. Bach has written 3 sections of music to go in between the minuet sections. And so we might call, if we're giving letter names to each section, we might call the form A, B, A, C, A, D, A. A is the minuet. And B, C, and D are the other 3 parts. They only happen once. After each time one part happens, it returns to the A section. Also, because of just style reasons, after the minuet, the next section, which I'm calling B, is called trio, contrasting part after a minuet, and then the one right before the end is also called trio. So there is, at least in the way they're named, there is an arch or symmetrical type structure to them too. So it's minuet, trio, minuet, polonaise, minuet, trio, minuet. And you also play the full minuet with repeat signs at the end and the beginning. Put those 2 times in the middle, you can just skip the repeat signs.
That's delightfully symmetrical.
It's delightfully symmetrical, and you might say round, which is part of why its name is rondo form. Rondo, rounded form, common in this kind of dance music and French suites and things like that. Speaking of French, I noticed that the timestamp to the minuet sections in the Netherlands Bach Society YouTube video, in them minuet is spelled not the way you would think. We would spell minuet in English M-I-N-U-E-T, and then in this it's spelled with an E, M-E-N-U-E-T.
Is it just the German spelling?
It is French, and I think that was very much on purpose.
Makes sense. It's a French dance, right?
Not only is it just the music style is, but also this was the whole aesthetic Bach was going for with the entire set of Brandenburg concertos. I don't mean they're supposed to sound French. I mean they were supposed to appeal to someone who appreciated French, clearly. Because the title page and the dedication and the sort of humble offering to the Margrave of Brandenburg, you can see in Bach's hand, that letter is in French. So he either was fluent in French and just knew French, or he worked that out. I'm not sure how precise his French is. If any of our French-speaking listeners want to let us know how good Bach's French is. I'm not sure if I've ever heard that I don't think I've ever heard that it was bad. So I think he was just a multilingual person of the time in continental Europe.
Yeah.
Being in those Germanic states, which were not collectively unified at this time, it was advantageous to do a little role-playing as French or Italian every once in a while to try to show that you had culture and class, and probably also to write a minuet and to evoke these social subgroups of interest, these outdoory kind of winds and reeds and these very outdoor horns with these proper stiff indoor string instruments, but putting them all together.
I was trying to think of a modern example of this. What's a pop musician that is known for being sort of welcoming to all different cultural types of music? There are a few. One super famous one comes to mind is Lady Gaga. That's a pop star whose music does not all just sound like just pop music. It's influenced by a lot of different styles. There's a little bit of jazz in there. There's a little bit of electronic. There's a lot of different flavors in that music. But it just seems like a weird comparison, Bach to Lady Gaga. But the point is that, like you said, these were not just pieces, but they were statements of, I guess, Bach's cultural roundedness, like a way to show that he was not only composing in a style that would befit people that only lived within a few miles radius of where he was.
The examples of this kind of musical culture blending to show an unorthodox mixture of, I guess, social class. That's it's a huge topic of discussion, and I'm sure there's a lot of really cool examples to think of. But the first one that came to mind for me when you asked about thinking of more modern examples is Ainada Mar, the opera about Lorca and the Spanish Civil War by Osvaldo Goleov. The opera, it needs to have Spanish music in it, of course. It also has like a touch of klezmer in there to represent that character, and there's even Caribbean flavors in there, all mixed with the flamenco like background. And then there's also like harsh digital tones of what are supposed to be like loudspeakers. It's really fascinating. And it was written in 2003. It would take too long, but I think now I'm going to be thinking about other really interesting examples that are that exact thing.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are plenty. And that's the kind of thing that you can find modern examples for, but also really old examples too. But we could have said all of that preceding podcast content, and it could have just been the most forgettable music as well. But it's not. Of course, it's really high quality, and it's really interesting, and there's a lot to say. First thing is that first chord we hear in the minuet. A fast triple meter is what we're expecting. We get 1, 2, and 3, and 1. And the horn calls are relegated to the background, but they get to be there. But how about that first chord, though, Alex?
Yeah, not in root position.
Not a root position chord. We've seen this before in his orchestral suite, his dance suites. It's not that weird to just hear a chord like this that's not in root position.
If it's not the first movement, then it's fine in Bach's eyes.
But it is strange in Baroque music, though, even still, just to start any movement this way.
It is.
It has a lot of forward momentum right off the bat because it doesn't really start at home. Like, it starts a foot off of home.
Not only does it start a foot off of home because of the inversion, but it also, there's this added spice of one extra flat that makes it feel like we're in the subdominant for a second before going back to the proper key.
It really is brimming with like a potential energy in that first measure. We know that that's our key. Our key of the whole thing is F, but we immediately are moving away and our foot is off the bass. Like, it makes me think of baseball, where right before the pitch happens, the runners on base might inch forward, but they can't do it too much because they don't want to get caught and get out, but they will be actually off the base, ready to go. That's what this kind of seems like. And since we have to return to it 3 more times, it's a great effect because it's always just going forward. It's not just, and we're back to this beginning, and we're back to the refrain again, and we're back to the refrain again, and we're back. No, because every time the minuet returns, it's infused with sort of a new energy of moving forward. And I know Bach did that purposefully. You would fail as a composition student in the early 1700s if you started an exercise in first inversion. First inversion, dominant 7th chord of the 4, like this.
That's true.
You would fail the composition exercise. It's not allowed.
Yeah.
But it's so effective.
Also, it's 12 bars long, which is kind of cool. Like, the opening section is 12 bars. It starts on that subdominant flavor, so it's an extra flat, a darker sound for 4 bars. Then the middle 4 bars, it feels like F major, so we're back in the middle, back on home base there. And then the last 4 bars land on a dominant, which you expect for a binary form like this. You expect the end of the A section to be a dominant chord. So that's 1 flat taken away. So it's also very symmetrical in that way, this first A section here.
It is. And it follows the rule of 3s.
That we talked about in the last episode, yeah.
It's in 3 groups of 4. The first one is strange and moving forward and with a lot of momentum. The second one is fully in it and in its journey. And the third one is a return back toward home, but not complete because it's not ending on F yet. To be clear, we're talking about the first section of the minuet of 2. So we're talking about the A section of the minuet and not the B section of the minuet.
Binary form.
The minuet itself is divided into 2 parts. So we're talking about the first 12 measures of the minuet. Even in the first 3 measures, speaking of rules of 3, there is a 3 in the first 3. There is a repetition of the motive. We first have a violin ba-dum-dum-dum. Then the next measure, the overlap to the next measure where the bass instruments have it as part of their bass line. Da-dum-dum-bum-ba-ba-bum. And if it's actually considered to be 2 measures long, then the bass instruments have both measures as an overlap. And then the violin has it again in the 3rd measure of the minuet. It follows the rule of 3 that you mentioned in the previous episode, where it starts with 3 of something, but the last one has an extra tag to it to make it round off into 4 measures, but it still seems like 1, 2, 3, and end. Except the difference is that this group of 3 notes, or 4 if you count the note after those 3 notes, are the same, and they're not a sequence going up or down, like the first 2 examples, respectively, of the previous Allegro movement, movement 3. And the fact that they all have to have that E flat in there, we're in the key of F, so we immediately open with 3 measures in a row of an imitated thing that is not in our key, but instead moving in the flat direction by 1 notch in the wheel of the circle of fifths. Like we've said, it's not just throwing us a little bit and also giving us some instant momentum, but it's almost like it's in a different mode.
Feels like Mixolydian.
Flatted 7th degree of a scale. Bum, E flat. In the key of F, it's kind of like rock and roll. It's Mixolydian mode.
Yeah.
Of course, in classical music, ever since from the Baroque all the way through to the Romantic era, that's not what it means. It usually means you're just in the dominant chord and you're going to move into your tonic chord and you're still in just one key, but still, or the dominant chord of something, moving to the next thing. But Bach did use modes. I mean, some of the chorales that ended in Phrygian, he preserves that and he makes them sound just as dominant chords in a minor mode. But Bach surely did this on purpose. He knew about the old modes. He knew that he wouldn't have called this Mixolydian, I'm sure. He would have said, we are in F major, and I'm moving temporarily to B flat in order to then go to C and then go to F again. But he knew what he was doing by starting it so strangely. The second half of the minuet is somewhat more straightforward, although it also starts in an inversion, except for this time it's transposed so that we will end correctly. It's like a circle in the sense that if you move 180 degrees clockwise, then rather than moving that same distance counterclockwise, you could just move that distance clockwise again and you would get to the same place. Except it's more like moving 1 hour on a clock and then teleporting to 2 hours back and then using the same material to move 1 hour forward again, because you can then just reuse material. But it seems very different. And it seems meaningfully different because you start somewhere and temporarily end in a second place and then begin in what seems like that place only to end home. It's like a trick. Like, how did we get back? The answer to the question, how did he pull that trick, is it's not actually a very special thing to this minuet. It's true of most binary pieces of this era. It's just that he began hinting at going from the 1 to the 4 key, and that is the same move as going from the 5 to the 1 key, which is how it ends.
I love when these things are microcosms and macrocosms. Like the 4, the relationship between the perfect 4th and the perfect 5th is just an inverse. Composers can use it like that. And then large scale, it serves as a formal marker here. Like it's what this piece is built out of. And most, as you said, binary pieces in this era. You just use that because it's a good building block. It's a sure foundation. So it also works as a strong interval to build your chords from. It's all just acoustical science, but it's cool to see how it's applied in little ways and then in larger ways too.
Mm-hmm.
It's also rhythm too. It's also the reason why a fifth interval that's in tune sounds good, because at a very, very fast rate, the vibrations of those notes are at a ratio of whole numbers, specifically 3-2 for a perfect fifth. So in other words, there's a pulsating sound and another pulsating sound, and the ratio is 3-2 for the pulsations. Does that make sense? Am I making sense at all?
Yeah.
You speed those pulses way, way, way up. What you get sounds just like a perfect fifth interval.
Yeah, in other words, if you slow way, way down a 2-note interval, you will get this even ratio if they're being played in justly in tune. But even more than acoustic physics, it's also just the cultural buildup of hundreds of years of a Western music theory that some of it is not really acoustic. A lot of it is, because that's just what sounds good. Pythagoras knew that. But some of it is just
conventions of the time.
Yeah, how harmony has progressed.
And how the instruments also shaped that as they were being innovated.
Mm-hmm.
And different, musical motives and figures were easier to play than others on string instruments at the time, so those became more popular. It's a little bit of a natural selection of musical style happening.
And divisions by class. And so here we have instruments that kind of don't even really go together. But that's the genius of Bach, is that he knew, and composers knew, that these instruments could play together. And the orchestra got bigger after this. But before it, there was Bach, and he knew that the hunting horns and the common vulgar oboes and the fancy elites and violins could make this beautiful dance music all together. And they could have a moment of forgetting their social mores and just participate in this beautiful, rich minuet.
And now, here's the beginning of the minuet, the first time through from Brandenburg 1. If this introduction to a musical moment from the Brandenburg Concertos has piqued your interest about the rest of the Brandenburg Concertos, they are all there, available from the Netherlands Bach Society, all with high-quality performances and video.
So if we've covered the minuet, but only talked about this ritornello refrain, the actual minuet part, what is left?
There is a trio movement, and then a polonaise, and then a second trio. For next week's episode, we're going to dive into both trio movements, then save the polonaise. It's our final episode for the week after.
Until next time, whether ye be a fancy pants noble elite, or a shepherd, or a town crier, or huntsman, enjoy those moments.